Do you want to paint water lilies that actually look real? In this video, I'm going to show you how simple colour mixing, not drawing skills, is the only secret to getting realistic water painting. I'm going to give you lots of my easy cheats, tricks and techniques so you make your paintings look real, even if you're an absolute beginner. Now these are the colours that we're going to use for the tutorial. If you can't remember them later in the tutorial, you can always look them up in the video description below. Now for the outline, I drew it in pencil and then I went over it in pen, so I've got basically an outline to colour in. But if you find that you struggle with drawing, what you can do, I've attached a reference photo of my painting. You're very welcome to go to the description below the video and download it. I've even put it in black and white if you want to download it and print it so you can easily trace it. So if you go to the video description below this video, and there's a link for it, you can just happily download it from my website. But if you're feeling really confident, here is a reference photo if you'd like to hand draw it yourself without tracing. And then when you're happy with your outline and you've got it all painted on, just dry it with a hairdryer so we don't smudge it when we're working on it. And it's so much easier because you can literally just colour it in. So we're going to work from the back and move forward. So what we're going to do, we're going to paint the water first and then we'll paint all the lilies on top. So we're going to mix a sky colour and we're going to make it really pastel. So we're going to use white and ultramarine blue. Now ultramarine blue is kind of a cool blue. And we're going to add some brown, some burnt umber brown, which basically turns it more grey and sucks a bit of the colour out. And we're going to add a tiny bit of yellow, just a dot, to turn it a little bit green to look like musty sort of pond water. So all we're going to do, if you look at my reference photo, and as I say, you're very welcome to download it at home. All we're going to do is we're just going to block in this area and just make it all a central colour. And this is going to act like the shimmer on our water where the light is coming down between some trees. Now with acrylics, they tend to dry a bit cheap and a bit streaky. So if that happens to you, you can always dry your work with a hairdryer and give it a second coat of paint. So look, I've got lots of streaks. That's totally normal. All you have to do, look, is just use thicker paint once it's dry and go over the top, and that will get rid of all those horrible streaks. Now as we come down, if you'd like to look at the reference photo, we're going to use phthalo blue, which is a little bit more turquoisey than the ultramarine blue. It's a lot less dark. And we're going to add that to the mix. And we're going to add lots of white, so it's still very pastel. We're going to get more white, make it even more pastel because acrylics dry darker than you think. We're going to add our brown and we're going to turn it more grey like previously. And then we're going to add a tiny bit, I think, a little bit of sap green, just again to turn it a bit more murky. And then all we're going to do, I've got a little bit of water on my brush. We're just going to gently blend it into the previous colour. And we're going to kind of create the illusion that it's getting darker as we move away from the sunlight in the top corner. And we move down into the canvas. So if any of you are a big Bob Ross fan, I know I am, I grew up watching Bob Ross. He used to say some ingenious advice for painters, which was to darken up your corners. And what that does is it gets people to look towards the middle of the painting. So all I'm doing, look, I've got a nice smaller brush, I've got barely any paint, and I'm just blending it into the canvas really, really gently. Look, if I get really dark streaks, I can just soften it up, look. And all we want to do, we just want to leave a little bit of a gap in the middle so it looks like shimmer coming down, and we're just going darker around the edges. And then as I say, we're going to get darker in our corners and at the bottom of the canvas to get you to look off into the distance towards that middle area between those two sort of bushes. So I'm just going to come around my lotus flower. I'm just going to colour all this area in. So as I say, having an outline makes it so much easier. It's like a colouring in book. It makes your life so much easier to just work around. So I'm just trying to soften up areas. So this area is going to be the reflection of the tree line, but at the bottom it's going to be quite dark. And as I say, we're going to make it so you look towards the middle. So we're going to combine phthalo blue and ultramarine blue. We're going to add burnt umber brown, and look, it turns it almost black. Look at that. So we're going to add some white because it's a bit too harsh. So phthalo blue, ultramarine blue, brown and white, and you should get this nice bluey grey. We're going to add a little bit of green just to again make it less dark, and then all we're going to do is we're going to start blending it into the previous colour. So if you can see, look, it's the same trick. We start off with the lightest colour, then we've got the sort of middle colour, and now we're getting slightly darker, and we're just going round those edges to create the illusion that the transition between the light and the dark is just gradually getting darker. So look, if you add a little bit of water to your brush, you can always smooth it. And then again, look, phthalo blue, ultramarine blue, burnt umber brown, a little bit of sap green. And then now we're not going to add hardly any whites. We're just going to mix it into the previous colour. And we're going to frame our corners and make it nice and dark blue. Now we don't want to use black just yet, because if you see from the photo, what we want to do is our shadows, we want to have the darkest darks. So we want to save things like black to the very end when we put on things like our reflection and our ripples. So by using this very dark blue, we can frame our painting, but it still leaves room to have a darker dark for our shadows to make them look more 3D. And then remember, always, acrylics dry darker than you think. So it's always best to go not so dark that you can't pull it back. So look, all I'm doing, I'm blending it into the previous colours. I've got these nice darkened corners that gets you to look off into the distance. And again, look, if your work is streaky, look, mine is totally streaky. There's lots of bits of canvas showing. I can always remix the paint. I can always use a bit of water if they dry up, and just spend 5 minutes going over it once it's dry. Look, just spending that 5 minutes, look how darker and professional that looks, just going over it. So with the tutorial, pause it, spend 5 minutes on your painting. So now we're going to mix that mix, which was phthalo blue, ultramarine blue, burnt umber brown and sap green, but we're not going to add any white. So phthalo blue, ultramarine blue, sap green and burnt umber, but no white, and you should get what looks like black, but it's not black, it's just off black. And this is going to be our darkest shadows. What we want to do at the top of the canvas, we're just using this off black to create the illusion of a faraway hedge line that's kind of meeting the water at our riverbank, and then we're just going to have a reflection underneath it coming down, sort of cascading into the water. Don't worry if you paint over your lily pads. We can paint them back in with some green in a minute. I'll show you how to do that. So we just want to sort of block in a rough shape of the bushes above, sort of reflecting in the water. So there we go. Easy peasy. Don't stress too much. You don't need to have it really precise. We just want it all blocked in solid colour. Let's do another one far off into the distance here just to break it up. I'm going to leave a tiny gap just so it looks like it's got a little bit of the riverbank sort of meeting, and then we've got the shimmer. But if your reflections are flat or streaky, don't worry, you can just dry it just like we did with the corners of our painting, look, and give it a second coat of paint. Don't worry. I'm going to do a video on varnishing, because acrylics once varnished look like this, so I'll teach you all how to do that. And then what we're going to do now, we're going to paint a little bit of texture on our trees. We're going to get some sap green, some ultramarine blue, sap green and ultramarine blue, and a little bit of burnt umber. If you struggle with painting trees, we do actually have a playlist on forest and trees. We've got lots and lots of step-by-step tutorials teaching you how to create foliage, bushes, trees, light, branches. Really easy, like this tutorial, which will teach you how to do it step by step. So look, all I'm doing, I'm kind of glazing over the top. And one thing I've just didn't mention, as I just add some yellow to my green, my black color is dry. Don't try to do this over a wet painting. Now this tutorial is a tutorial on how to paint a lake and water reflections. It's had about 30,000 views here on YouTube. that's a really easy tutorial if you want to actually know how to do this. But all I'm doing, look, I'm just glazing over the top. I'm leaving a little bit of texture by leaving gaps in the underpainting, and I'm just doing it on that outer right hand side, and then just to imply the light. So I'm happy with the reflections. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to mix some green just off camera. There we go. Some green and brown to create a sort of a manky green. So green and brown. And then what we're going to do, we're going to start just painting in our lily pad. So let's get some white and make it more neutral. And we're going to kind of create a middle colour, very much like our water. We want it very neutral by adding white. So by adding the brown to suck out the vibrancy. And what we're going to do, we're just going to block in all our lily pads on our water with this one core colour. We're going to put highlights and shadows on them. What I like to do is I like to block them in with a big brush, and I just leave the edges. So I don't worry about being scruffy. I just kind of leave the edges. And then when I'm happy and they're all blocked in, I just use a smaller brush to go around the edges. So I just use a big sort of medium-sized brush just to sort of block them in, and then I can always swap back to use a sharper brush later. So let's get some green and some blue. So green and blue to create a dark colour like we did on our trees. It's a little bit of white because it's a bit too harsh. So green, blue and white, and we'll kind of get this sort of like darkest sort of cool green. And all I'm going to do, look, with a thin brush, I'm going to go round my lily pads, and then I'm going to come out from the center and just create lines. So think of something like an orange or a lemon or something like that. They kind of have these sort of grooves. It's kind of like these sort of, they have the central bit and they have these sort of lines coming away from the center. So we're kind of trying to create that on a lily pad. And look, I can even get some blue, and I can go round my lily pad if I've got any white canvas showing, just to sort of neaten it up. So what I tend to do is I try to create a little circle in the middle, look, and then I just come out with a small brush from the middle, and then I outline it. So I outline it, I create a little circle in the middle, and then I just create these sort of little lines coming straight from the middle, and that kind of gives it the 3D effect. So I'm just doing that on all of them. Some of them I'm kind of turning like a Pac-Man shape with a little mouth. I don't want it all to be totally circle. Some of them have got this funny shape. So I'm just doing this on all of them. The ones in the distance I'm not really worrying about. I'm not going to do too much fine detail. So we've got this kind of basic detail, and then we're going to put some darker darks to make it look more realistic. So let's get some green off camera. Excuse me, I didn't realise how zoomed in I was. And let's add our brown again. So green and brown, sap green and brown. And let's add some ultramarine blue to make it nice and dark and moody. And then let's get a small brush, as it'll make your life so much easier to outline it. So with lily pads, what tends to happen is they're kind of like a pizza sort of shape, like a circle, but they have these outer rims, and what happens is as they get old and manky, they kind of curl round and they get these sort of curled over edges. So by using this dark colour, we can sort of imply that. So we can go around, look, the sort of thick edges that they have. We can even sort of outline them. We're just trying to make them look more 3D. So the colour we laid previously, we're not going to just go over it all. We're just going to do it in selective areas, like some of the edges. Like we can have some areas of shadow underneath. And as I say, we're not going to do it on all the lilies. We're not going to do it on all areas. We're just being selective. Try to think where the light is coming. If the light is coming from above, certain areas are going to be curled round and they're going to be in the shade. The underneaths of the lily pads, like the bottoms of the lily pads, are going to be in the shade. Look, the underneaths, because they're not going to get much light. So if you're just trying to think where the light would be shining down, that always leads your work to look more real. And as I say, using a fine liner brush, they don't need to be expensive, but using a really thin brush just makes your life so much easier, and you don't get so much globby big bits of paint and stuff. If you dry your painting in stages, look, if you make a mistake or you're a bit rough like me, look, you can always get a baby wipe and just rub it out, and your painting underneath is always dry. With acrylics, I tend to do a section, dry it with a hairdryer, do a section, dry it with a hairdryer. It's a bit repetitive, but what it kind of does is it kind of gives me the assurance that if I do make a mistake and I stick my hand in paint or anything like that and it smears, well, I can just wipe it away with a baby wipe. So all I'm doing with this dark colour, I'm just going to put in some more lily pads, and I can get some green and yellow, look, and I can just fill them in if I've added some more. So all I've got, look, is green and yellow, and I'm just adding some more lily pads. So what we're going to do now, I'm happy with this section. My painting's all dry. All my green lilies are all dry. What I'm going to do, I'm going to create some shimmer from the light coming down from this side. So we're going to get some sky colour, which was white and ultramarine blue. So add loads of white, because as I say, acrylics always dry darker than you think. So we want to go really pastel. And I'm just going to use a small brush. Now the problem is sometimes when you add highlights, look, they look a bit harsh and cartoony. I've got quite a lot of paint. I'm just kind of putting the shimmer on where the leaves curl over and they sort of have some texture. And they sort of have like sunlight sort of hitting down, but it kind of looks a bit rubbish. So you can do a couple of methods to make it look softer. You can use a fan brush, which is nice and soft and the shape of a fan, and you can kind of smooth the paint, look, to create like a shimmer. Or if that doesn't take your fancy, you can use a thing called a blender brush, which is kind of like a smooth round makeup style brush, which again is really, really good for doing this. But I like this option. I like to use a completely dry brush, just a thin brush with no water on it whatsoever. I wipe away 90% of the paint, so I've got barely any paint on my brush. It's almost like chalk, like a really thin outline, and I like to just smooth it and rub this dry brush back and forth, and I find I get much better results. Again, by using a small brush I can get fine detail, but all it is, I'm not using any water and I've got barely any paint, so this kind of makes everything just sort of like colouring in, like shading. And look, by being really gentle I can extend this to kind of look like shimmer. We'll neaten it all up afterwards. We just want to lay the foundations with the light first before we put the mediums and the darks on. And we're only going to do these two kind of big lily pads in the foreground. It's just to make them look more 3D because they're closest to the viewer. So I'm just adding some shimmer to some of these ones. I'm doing the same technique. I've got barely any paint on my brush. And look, I can even smooth it out with my finger. I'm just trying to think, look, where the light is sort of cascading onto these lily pads. In between the grooves we've made with the darker green to make it look 3D. Things like these outer edges where it hits the sunlight, where it's curled up. So just take your time. There's a great feature with YouTube now where you can press the bottom right hand corner and there's a gear button, and you can slow the video down or you can speed it up. So at home, use the tutorial how you will see fit. If you want to speed it up, speed it up. If you want to slow it down, you can do that. And also, if you like, you can change the language. So if you are English isn't your native language, you can put subtitles on. You can even put me in different languages like French or Spanish or anything that takes your fancy. That is the wonder of YouTube now and all this great stuff. This is a great tutorial. This is how to paint light beams. This is what we did last week, an underwater painting, but it also has a technique called glazing which covers this, and this is exactly what I was just talking about. By having a completely dry brush and barely any paint, so my brush is totally dry. I've wiped away 90% of the paint off my brush onto some kitchen roll, and all I'm doing with that tiny bit of paint and that really soft brush is I'm just glazing over my dry canvas. So we did this on the last two tutorials. We did this with this hand scene for the sunset, and it's really, really good for painting sort of like shimmer on your water or things like light beams, sunbeams. And all you're doing, look, you're just going over like a crayon and just leaving little gaps in the underpainting and just creating the illusion of ripples and texture by just smearing this barely any paint. And this technique is called glazing if you wanted to look it up. So let's get some green and yellow. Let's add a tiny bit of brown just to make it a little bit more mustardy, and a little bit of white. And all we're going to do, where we've got a really sharp highlight, we're just going to put sort of a medium colour in between some of the grooves, just so the highlight is not so harsh. And so when we add the darks in a minute, it's got a link. So again, think of yin and yang. We don't want to have two really extremes either side. So we want to have sort of something in the middle that sort of links the really, really darks to the really, really lights. So again, just take your time. Use a fine brush. Try to go around the grooves that you've already put down. As I say, don't worry about your edges or anything if they're scruffy. We're going to put the darkest darks on in a minute. Now if you mix some white and yellow, you should get a Naples yellow. So all it is white and cad yellow. And all we're going to do for our lotus flower, we're just going to colour in totally in that colour. Again, I'm using a small brush because it's so much easier to do the petals just sticking out with a small brush. But all I'd like you to do is just completely colour your lotus flowers. We're going to have one in the foreground and one sort of to the left here in the background. And then we're going to get some pink, and we're just going to mix that with our white and yellow. So pink, white and yellow, just to create a really pastel pink. If you haven't got pink at home, you can just add white and red to make pink. And all we're going to do is just at the bottom, they have this lovely sort of pink hum. If you think lotus flowers are the symbol of like enlightenment, think of a crown. They're normally purple with the crown chakra. So they have this sort of hint of pink and purple at the bottom. We're going to get some white and ultramarine blue. And we're just going to get our thin brush and we're just going to create some gaps in between the pink and the yellow. Just create the illusion of texture. Again, we're not going to go really super detailed because it's a tutorial for beginners. But we're just putting some texture in between them. And again, this colour, white and ultramarine blue, acts as a really good sort of way to do that. And then just on the tips of all our petals, we're just going to use pure titanium white. And this is just going to make it look like areas in the sun. So just like our lily pads, it's just going to make them look like they're highlighted. As I say, I don't want to do too much detail. And then we're going to get some yellow and some orange to make a gold colour. And then we're just going to add some pollen in the centre. So I like to just create sort of a V shape in the centre, just to sort of imply sort of some pollen from the flower in the middle. And then you can always get some white after you've kind of got your little V shape, and just put some petals sort of look like they're covering over slightly. And then if you'd like to, you can get some pink. If you want, you can add a tiny bit of blue, and just with your fine brush, as I say, they have this beautiful sort of pinky purple sort of aura where the petals are sort of coming out from. So as I say, lots of cultures you have this as a symbol of overcoming hardships and blossoming from within, or from inside out. So a lot of cultures use this as enlightenment. You have the Buddha and things like that. So I love lotus flowers, it's so pretty. And then we're just going to get some green and yellow. And then all we're going to do, I'm just going to create some of the leaves that when it sort of blooms from the underneath, they have these sort of leaves that are coming out. And again, just to make it look 3D. So just using that thin brush. And then we're going to create our shadow colour. And this is the bit where all your painting starts to look super real. Now I realised that when I filmed this, I didn't show it very easily. But all it is blue, ultramarine blue, phthalo blue, and some brown. So ultramarine blue, phthalo blue, and brown. And then if you get a fine brush like you've just done with your lilies, and you go round it, this is when we can create the shadows. So look, I'm going round the bottom bits of my lilies. So I'm thinking, where is the lilies going to have shade? And I can create the illusion of shadows. I can even create ripples now. So this color, phthalo blue, ultramarine blue, and a little bit of brown. It's still very blue. It's not as black as our shadows on the right and the left. And because of that, I can use that and my fine brush to go around the bottom of all my lilies and create a 3D effect. And the same on my lotus flower. And this should start to make it look real. I can even, just on the outer edges where these lily pads curl up, some of our water lilies, they have this dark edge, as I was saying previously. You can even use that colour to really emphasize that. And I can even get some of the previous colour and go around my lotus flower. If I find that I've been a bit gun-ho, I can make the petals look a bit nicer. I can even get lighter colours, look, and put in some ripples. I can change the shapes of things once they're dry, look, with the colours. So spend in just a few minutes doing that. Now this is a flat brush, and what we're going to do is get that dark colour. I like to use flat brushes like this painting to paint waves. I find it really, really easy to paint ripples and waves because the brush is flat. So look, watch, I can get this brush and I can just go back and forward, and because the brush is flat, it makes my life so much easier. So we're going to get some of that dark colour, which is sap green, phthalo blue, ultramarine blue and brown. And that was the colour we made for our really dark darks. You can add a little bit of black if you want to. Just a little bit of black, because black kind of kills all colour. And all we're going to do, we're going to use that sharp edge just to create ripples. Look, so I've got some ripples. I can create some shadows under some of my big lily pads here in the foreground. Let's have a big shadow. And using the flat edge of the brush makes it so much easier to get flat, straight lines. I've got really wonky sort of, I don't know what it is. I don't even drink. But when I paint, I haven't really got a steady hand. So I find having a flat-headed brush is a godsend for painting waves and ripples and anything that I have to do with a straight line, as it kind of does all the work for me. So look, just doing all these straight lines. I can even fan it out and soften edges to make it look like it's more of a shade. So look, I can make these shadows of my lotus flower look softer by just using the sharp edge of my brush to go around edges, and these water lilies here. Now here I went a bit gun-ho. I completely forgot it was a tutorial for beginners, and I just went into auto mode and started painting like photorealistic stuff. But I didn't really like my ripples here, and I painted over them. So just ignore this bit. You don't need to get a fine brush and put in these rubbish ripples. But I like to leave all my mistakes in my tutorials because I like to show people, even people like myself, we're very pedantic, we're a bit OCD with our work, and we always have bits we don't like. And we're always trying to fix it. So that's all artists. So if you do that at home, don't fret. That's all of us. So look, I've got a clean brush and I've got some chalk, because chalk is really, really good for drawing things without committing. So I've got a ruler and some chalk, and all I've done is I've measured a straight horizon, and I've just got some white and ultramarine blue. And all I'm going to do with my flat brush is kind of create a roughly straight line. As I say, I'm a bit wonky. And then I can create some shimmer coming down with that light. This is a great tutorial we did the other day, which teaches you how to do this in literally about 10 minutes. And all I'm going to do, look, is just get some pure white. And I'm just going to use my flat brush to smooth it out. And just on the very top where the water and the horizon meet, I'm just going to create the illusion of light shimmer with pure white coming down. I'm just going to let it fade out so it looks really nice and realistic. And now I think she's finished. So I've signed her on the bottom left hand corner. I put her on a nice easel. So we've just learned how to do that water shimmer. We've got this nice blended background with our darkened corners to get you to look towards the middle. We've learned how to do painting reflections in our water. We've learned how to paint water lilies and lily pads, and then we've got the highlights. We've made them 3D. We've got the shadows, and we've painted our lovely lotus flowers in the middle. So all in all, a really lovely tutorial. We've learned how to paint these water lily painting in literally 30 minutes. So here are some of the paintings tutorials that we recommend. That if you've enjoyed this one, you can learn all the steps that you've seen and the videos that are recommended in the tutorial. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel, and please tag me with your versions of your water lily paintings, because I love seeing all your work at Stewart Paintings on social media such as Instagram and Facebook. Right, take care everyone, happy painting, see you soon, bye.